pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Sherry Archdale.
Here.
Linda Bailey.
Here.
Michelle Franklin.
Here.
Rebecca Kern.
Here.
Julie True.
Here.
Judy Strong, present. Charles Thomas.
Here. Need a motion to go into executive session?
Mr. President, I make a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Sherry Archdale.
Aye.
Linda Bailey.
Aye.
Michelle Franklin.
Aye.
Rebecca Kern. Julie True.
Aye.
Judy Strong, yes, and Charles Thomas.
All individuals, would you mind just stepping out? Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Sherry Archdale.
Aye.
Linda Bailey.
Aye.
Michelle Franklin.
Aye.
Rebecca Kern. Julie True.
Aye.
Judy Strong, yes, and Charles Thomas.
Need a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on just a second. Julie made the motion to resume open session, is that right? And who seconded?
Michelle.
Michelle, thank you. And motion to adjourn.
Motion made by me.
Thank you.
Second by Michelle.
Okay, thank you. I'll catch up here.
Roll call.
Sherry Archdale. Linda Bailey.
Aye.
Michelle Franklin. Rebecca Kern. Julie True.
Aye.
Judy Strong, yes. Charles Thomas.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Member, you mind standing for the pledge of allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Sherry Archdale. Here. Linda Bailey.
Here.
Michelle Franklin. Here. Rebecca Kern. Here. Julie True.
Here.
Judy Strong, present, and Charles Thomas.
Present.
I'm sorry. That was on the agenda.
Are there any questions or comments from the audience on the budget?
Tammy Bauer, 615 Dempsey Street. Is there money in the budget for field trips, and where is the money coming from? And does this budget reflect any of the Parents Club money, or are you just going to be spending it like you have to?
Thank you. Is there any others?
Tabitha Brainerd, 608 Corolla Street. How much less money did we get in transportation, and how is transportation going to be affected next year? And does the budget reflect funds made from anything that we've done this far as the t-shirts, market day, popcorn days, or anything such like that we've had so far this year?
Any others? Okay. Hearing none.
Joe,
Oh,
I think we should go through Linda's.
okay, go ahead.
Linda had questions and concerns regarding, and I passed those out to you guys. Do y'all have these? Did you get it? Not with? Would you pass those over to Sherry and Michelle? Because this year was so challenging in terms of forwarding a balanced budget, we enlisted Guy's help. and then he agreed to come and speak to this. The first issue deals with the transfer of funds. And basically, it's about that site and construction fund that we have not used, according to Shelley, for many, many years. And so, Guy, can you address what we did with it's basically the energy grant money?
Last year you budgeted the receipt of an energy grant, and as I understand it, you have not spent the proceeds during that fiscal year. You deposited those monies into the operation and maintenance fund, which is all fine and good. But with this fiscal year, you would want to begin to spend those monies. I do understand there may be a plan to return the monies.
Yeah, we have to talk about that, but
But regardless, whether you spend them or return them, the question is, would you be inflating your expenditures without an offsetting revenue in the current fiscal period? And because the operation and maintenance fund is one of the 4 funds that comprise the financial accountability and assurance score that the state board uses to rate your financial health, the concern on the part of the superintendent was that it may adversely affect your financial score unintentionally. And so was there a mechanism in law, rule, or administrative code to keep that from happening? And sure enough, in fact, the state has recognized that potential could arise, that you receive money in one year, but you don't spend it in that year, that you would spend it in a subsequent year. Bond proceeds are a very good example. They tend to be deposited specifically in the capital projects fund or in the life safety fund, whereas many times grants, they don't come with a lot of specificity, so there's not a lot of guidance as to where to deposit them. So the operation and maintenance fund is a logical fund, given the nature of these particular expenditures. But because they were not spent during the last fiscal year, and in large part because you probably still were in the planning process, which makes perfect sense, and many funds like that are of these nature have a 2 to 3 year spending window. That's especially true of bonds. You have to spend within 3 years of IRS regulations. So in this particular case, because you didn't want to inflate your expenditures and affect your FOS score, getting back to the question at hand, was there a mechanism in rule, law, or a regulation that would allow you to put them in a different fund that would allow you to spend those monies and yet not affect that financial score? And in fact, there is in the administrative code, part 23 governing education. It's the Education and Cultural Resources, subsection A, Education. State Board of Education, Chapter 1, Part 1, Requirements for Accounting, Budgeting, and Financial, and specifically Section 100, Table E, Sources and Uses of Accounts. The permanent transfer, well, this particular, we're talking about the interest now, we're talking about the larger grant.
Yeah.
Permanent transfer, other revenue transfer for capital projects, which on your budget form, do they have this form? Okay.
Well, they have this, and they have both.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's the one. So this is their packet.
Was in the packet.
Okay, so in your packet, I'm looking at this form of the state budget. And if you look at what would be line 74 on page 3, so if you go to page 3, line 74, it's account number 8820. And in the administrative code, it provides the permanent transfer of, let me read the broader heading. Transfer from other funds for capital projects. other revenues transferred for capital projects, other revenue pledged to pay for capital projects. So that's the citation specifically in the code. Provides that those monies, interfund and interfund transactions, permanent interfund transfers, when revenues of other sources of funds are pledged to pay for a capital project or acquisition, the money shall be transferred into the capital projects fund, which is Fund 60. So if you look then in that same document that I referred to, you'll see on page 2 of that document, at line 43, account 7800, the same dollar amount coming into which under column H is the capital projects fund. So by administrative rule, you can transfer those monies from the operation and maintenance fund in this instance to the capital projects fund. This transfer does not require a separate resolution, hearing, or other act. You can do those things, but it does not require that. Unlike another transfer that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But this transfer does not. Simply by approving your budget, you authorize that transfer to occur. And for good reason. The capital project fund is designed to spend proceeds down so that you, in effect, 1 year you receive the monies and typically spend maybe a little, but in subsequent years you spend the balance of those funds down. You typically then show deficits in that particular fund for multiple years. That's why that fund is not included in the financial accountability and insurance score, because it otherwise would inflate your expenditures year over year over year and cause you some problems. So in terms of propriety of it, you are covered by administrative rules and regulation, and that's the citation, and I'll provide this to the superintendent so that you have a copy of it.
Questions?
What was the time frame that we had to spend for that grant?
There was a belief that it was 5 years, that you had 2 years to assign it and 5 to spend it. That is not the case. This money needs to be spent by April. So we need to have a conversation. That's why we indicated in here, and we'll talk about that later. Linda questioned it. It was my recommendation based on the economic climate, the uncertainty of our future, the need to stabilize our program and personnel today, and for the coming years, it would be my suggestion, even though not popular, and maybe Guy, having done many, I think he's doing a $30 million project now or something like that. I think the state is not fond of that approach, but I think when initially this body entered into an agreement, the financial future looked very different. And that coupled with the fact that my research tells me, and I'll corroborate that while we thought that it was a 5-year course, I could reason a $50,000 expenditure a year. $150,000 a year is quite a different matter.
So it wasn't specifically stated in the grant?
Well, it says 2 years and 5 years.
That's what I thought.
But when the state says that's not what we meant, that's what we said, and I will get that in writing, but I called specifically and had a long discussion with that department at the state board, and it is in fact, there is a 5-year allowable period for major construction and like building a building. And Guy, maybe you can address that. I don't know if you're familiar with the energy grant, but in this particular project, they want the money spent by April. They were saying 2 years, not 5.
Let me ask, is this an Illinois clean energy grant? Yeah, got more than I got.
We did good writing that grant, but it's just worth a conversation, and we're gonna have that conversation later. This is not for me to decide, it's for you as a board to decide. Do you wanna go into your reserves and to what end for this particular project when we're now faced with a future that's diminishing programs that are much higher on the priority list than lighting?
My experience with the Illinois Clean Energy Grants is they basically fund about 20%, 10 to 20% of your total project. So when you entered into the grant, and whether your architect explained this to you at the time or not, you basically, in this particular case, we're looking at $1 million project, of which the grant would cover 20% in my estimation.
But in ours, we got fit because of our income level, we got 50% match. But still, if you carried out that whole project, it would be $500,000. You know, that's an enormous amount of money in a 2-year period of time.
I would note to you that you have substantial reserves, and so similar to what you did to transfer these funds, you could similarly transfer a portion of your reserves to make the match, if you will, and you could then carry forward with the project. Again, because of the size of your reserves, and at this time, probably very prudent to have, because we don't know what's going to happen with pension pushdown. So I quickly add that caveat to my remarks here.
In other words, leave it alone until we find out.
I'm not prepared to answer that question. I mean, if you want me to do that, I can, but I didn't come prepared to answer that.
Right.
But I would say that unlike many school districts, your board and your administrative staff have been prudent, clearly over the years, to accumulate these, at this time, necessary reserves. And given that you're under tax caps, that you're on a cash basis of accounting, and that you're in a county that has a history of late tax payments, you know, these are very prudent numbers to keep. We have similar reserves in Galesburg, similar reserves in Rich Township, where I also spent some time, in Champaign, lesser amount in Pekin in my years there, substantially more than my years in Peoria. I can share with you. They would be most jealous of you. But is there room enough to make a transfer of $250,000 to match those dollars to carry out a project? First blush, I would say yes. I would have to do projections to see what impact a pension pushdown would have on you over what period of time. So if it's $250,000, is that all fully loaded 100% immediately, or is that
That's additional.
the first? Okay. That's better than my 1.8 million in Galesburg. So
You're bigger.
a little bit. But that's the equivalent of, in many cases, you know, raises for staff over a period of time. And I wondered that, because that's the single largest item in your budget, you know, what's the likelihood that that's going to happen in collective negotiation? Okay, so that's why I don't feel comfortable answering definitively tonight, but I would suggest to you that you do have opportunity. Then the question becomes, do you need the money for the purposes for which the grant were written? I understand the lights have been changed, maybe a little bit earlier. And so are you just really throwing money at something that you've already done and you're really not going to get that 2 to 3 year payback that generally is looked upon from a lighting retrofit.
And we could certainly have Guy come back at the point we have to entertain this discussion, and there will be a point after the first of the year that I think we really need to look at when we balance out the energy grant, when we file for all the rebates and have a report complete, what are we left facing, and then what's our next best move? Do you want to continue on with the project, or do you want to return the funds that are unspent at that point?
Irrespective, this is the proper place to put those monies, because you truly are looking at a capital project. So you can move them over there, they can sit there, and then you can decide what to do with them, either use them for the intended purpose or return them. But you'll at least avoid inflating your expenditures in your building fund, which is something you don't need to do, nor do you want to.
So the next question then is on Title II. Title II is lower this year. How can our title funds that are based on low income be lower? Our enrollment is a little bit lower, but our census was, in my estimate, not complete and accurate. And title money is based on your census, not your free and reduced count. And so I have to explore opportunities to challenge those numbers.
Is that from the federal census or is taken in 10?
And that's,
The census, they do every 3 years, the federal government does a
So we'd be up for it again this coming year?
yes.
and I want to talk to them and find out ways that we can encourage people to fill out the paperwork, answer their door, whatever it takes, so that we get an accurate count, because our funds depend on that process. And we're kind of held hostage to how well that process goes.
And this reworking will probably be actually be based on the 2010 census. That's how much lag there is.
Can we go back to the question about the interest? The 15,000 that was under the 219,
Sure.
so it doesn't need board approval?
That, on the other hand, does. The transfer from the working cash fund is also governed by administrative code, and it specifically says the permanent transfer of the interest is subject to the provisions of the working cash fund section of the school code, 105 LCS 5/20-5, and that specific section is rather lengthy. It really, for the most part, talks about loaning money to funds and from them, but the last paragraph is the noteworthy one, and that reads, "Monies earned as interest from the investment of the working cash fund," which we're speaking to, "or any portion thereof may be transferred from the working cash fund to any other fund of the district that is most in need of the interest without any requirement of repayment to the working cash fund, upon the authority of the school board by separate resolution, directing the school treasurer to make such transfer." So you adopt the budget, which is really a blueprint or a plan. A lot of people mistake that as giving blanket authority to do everything. In many cases, that's what it is. It's an appropriation ordinance. But still, there are some, as in this particular case, other provisions that trump the budget. And so in this particular case, section 520-5 of the school code, specific to working cash monies, and in this case, the interest earned on those working cash monies, require a transfer of those interest monies to be done by proper resolution of the Board of Education. You still want to show it on your budget. You adopt your budget, but without separate authority, a second vote, if you will, you can't do anything with it. So you can show it there, but until you actually take that second step, can't
But
do
it
it.
has to go to the fund that most in need?
Well, most in need is broadly defined. In this particular case, if you have a project, your tort fund is showing a deficit, for example, you clearly can show that it's a fund most in need. But it wouldn't have to be that fund. You could argue that I'm trying to maintain a certain level of fund balance in a particular fund. Without that transfer, I can't maintain that balance, and that might affect, for example, my financial accountability score with the state. So that's, that definition of most in need is very, very broad. Boards have a great deal of latitude in determining, in the best interest of the board. It's good to have policy backing that up. So in Galesburg, for example, we have policy specific as to what kind of fund balances we want to have, so revenue to fund balance ratios, what kind of days of cash on hand we want to have in certain funds. And if we're unable to achieve those, given with the budget that we have, we could argue that a fund is most in need, therefore a transfer is appropriate in order to maintain that. So that's basically it.
Okay, Title II, we just talked about that, based on enrollment and low income, but certainly first on the census. TIF refund. This money is really what balanced our budget. It is by the grace of God, but unfortunately, it's money that was intended for LaSalle to upgrade, was what I was going to propose to the board. When we received the money to upgrade their technology, it's ending up being a gift that allows us, unlike many districts in our circumstance, to forward a balanced budget. We arrived at that figure because that's the clerk's figure. You know, this was a miscalculation. The refund was not accurate. Actually, I've been working with Phil Lanzini, who is the attorney at the village, and we began conversations 6 to 8 months ago, and we just received the money, and it's $178,000. It is now, by the way, in our account. It has finally been deposited.
How will that be dispersed?
It's in a check.
No, will it go into the ed fund? Will it have to go in for the tax levy?
We put it in the budget, and I'll have to say specifically where it went. I can ask Shelley where she deposited, but I would suggest it's in the ed fund. That's 80% of our money.
You're currently showing
It's
it
showing
in
it
the
in
operation.
the O&M.
And
Why wouldn't it have to be separated into the other accounts?
it could be. I mean, if it's
It doesn't have to be.
It depends on what
It's where do you need to balance the budget?
No, but if it was a refund and you do your tax levy, each one of those accounts, depending on the percentage, this is a refund, so wouldn't it go back into those individual accounts?
Yeah, and I would, not knowing the history of it.
And we can certainly look that up. Do we need to apportion it according to the levy?
If it's a miscalculation related to the initial tax levy, then I would agree it would need to be apportioned. If it is more on the order of payments of surplus monies, surplus TIF monies, then I think you can put it in any fund you want.
And
So
I think it's
not
more the
knowing the
latter.
answer to that question, if it is the latter, surplus, then you would actually want to record it in an account number 1960, and not where you're currently showing it at 1290. So if you can get clarification on that, that would help. But I think for purposes now, you're fine leaving it there, although you could just as easily move it to 1960, because you can also put it in operation maintenance funds. That's a good question.
And the question wasn't clear, otherwise we would have just made a call and determined if it was surplus
Think
or if
about
it was
until just
levy.
now.
Transportation, there was a question about the revenue. The revenue is generated from things like after school, students use our buses and take a trip and reimburse us. You know, that's the kind of thing that is shown in that line. We are anticipating a decrease of 107,000 about in transportation for 2013. What is the plan for next year, since no cost reductions were made for this year? Remember, there are cost reductions. We went from 12 runs to 9 runs. We use this as a transition year. We've not made it yet through winter. We wanted time to investigate pay to ride. We have to have a lot of conversations about what is the priority of the community in terms of transportation for our students. We had one issue this year with the older kids, and that's all. I imagine that if you moved to the 1.5 miles for the younger ones, there'd be a lot more concern. So the board has to come together and decide what is our reimbursement going to be. And we don't know that yet. Do you have any more information, Guy, on what it looks like for next year on transportation? How much less? Yeah.
The proration's the same, but the total appropriation, as you know, or may know, remained the same as last year. But everybody's costs went up. So even though it's prorated at, it's actually at 75 versus 77%, there's less money to distribute because the expense pie was bigger, but the total dollars remain the same. So you end up getting net fewer dollars on the order of magnitude, very much like the superintendent has identified to you. One of the things I did in preparation for tonight's meeting was to project, independent of your staff, your revenues, and you're right on the number I would have expected you to have in this environment. So kudos, I guess.
We were very careful at trying to look at our revenues and our costs, but we have to have hard discussions as a board at the committee level about what our transportation is going to look like in the future. I mean, you, as I recommended to you earlier, when we were very concerned about the revenues being reduced significantly in a number of categories, dramatically approaching transportation, doubling up on buses, reducing leases. Those are all conversations that we continue to have. You have to balance that with taking care of your employees, obviously, long-term folks, getting good bus drivers, knowing that if you release those bus drivers, they go to other places. You read in the paper, a lot of school districts don't have folks that are willing to take that job. So it's more than just about money. You're talking about people and their livelihood, balanced with your revenues, balanced with your community needs, and the law, you know, and so it's a conversation to be had again, certainly. But we did consider all those things, and in reducing STARS, what the early childhood program, what is not brought up and is very significant is that if we maintained that program, we would have had to hire another teacher. 80% of your money in your district is staff, is payroll and benefits. And because we went in the direction of the Head Start program, we've reduced the need to take on the expense of another staff person. That and a monitor, is upwards of $100,000 a year savings. And so we're gonna demonstrate to you how this body came together to double your reserves in the most challenging of economic times. And it was in fact through attrition, carefully combining programs and services, intergovernmental agreements to expand capacity, and a case in point is not having to hire a teacher because of the relationship you've established with an agency that will provide for the community not only the service, but double the service and a full service program for the families. So you've saved money and increased services.
I would take a moment to note to you that your transportation revenues for this year are inflated. And what I mean by that is you're counting on 2 payments that you didn't get. And next year you're counting on 3 payments of the 4 that you typically get. I think it's realistic to count on the 3. It's unfortunate that you didn't get 3 this past year, but you're basically counting on 5/4, if you will, and that won't continue into the future. So while your revenue from the state sources remain relatively steady, if you look historically, it's because the prior year you didn't get what you were expecting because you're getting a little bit more this year. So that's really what she's talking about long term. You have to adjust for. So that's a concern. One way in which you could address those dips from a FOS score, and I'll keep referring back to that state standard, if you will, is to adopt an accrual basis of accounting. It doesn't necessarily increase the amount of work on your bookkeeping staff, because at the end of the year the auditor does most of those modifications for you. The problem becomes if you're not watching when the monies are falling, you may miss that window. It requires a different level of sophistication.
Right.
So most school districts are on a cash basis, you're on a cash basis, so I'm not recommending you change. I'm just saying that you can smooth out those numbers and surprises if you run an accrual basis. And it's probably in your audit report every year. You probably have a recommendation or some qualification that you're not on an accrual basis. It's just standard.
What impact will the new TIF have on the school budget? We are going to talk about that at the next meeting. We are included in the TIF that's being proposed at the village. I understand they have the vote already. I'm not sure why LaSalle School is in it. I don't know enough about TIF to know how we would benefit. There is a potential, if we are in the TIF, to design an intergovernmental agreement for future construction where we would mutually benefit. I don't know what that would be at this point.
If we was in the TIF district before, like when they did all the reconstruction up here, then they could have carried it on down to LaSalle, like the sidewalks. Then we would have been in the TIF district, then we could have gotten the new sidewalks.
Yeah.
Since we weren't, we didn't qualify.
So they've put us in there. The impact to us on a TIF, of course, is that your EAV stays the same. We don't lose money. It's if that property is improved and gains in value. We don't receive that difference for what, 23, 25 years, some long time out.
23 unless they amend it, and then it could go to 30.
23.
But you're absolutely correct. By being within the boundaries, then they can use monies that are generated in that TIF for projects that would include your school without having to equally distribute amongst the other taxing bodies.
Also, we're talking about, again, a question was raised earlier. Linda raises the same question, and I hope we can finally address this. We are going to formally move to rescind the motion to commingle past parent club funds with district funds. Guy is a general state aid auditor, so he might better be able to address this. But initially, when the vote was made in March to combine to a one district parent and community engagement group, there was a thought about combining those monies. When I talked to the auditor at a later date, he was adamant that that should not happen. That if in fact there was any error, inadvertent or advertent, our general state aid could be frozen, and that that was a very dangerous thing to do. So that's my first responsibility, is to protect the district, to be a good steward of those funds. And so our error was in not rescinding and reforming that motion. That's when we made the final determination to just leave the money where it was. There was record of how that money is to be dispersed. So then the new monies will be placed in, again, a separate account that for purposes of easy communication will be referred to as PACE, a Parent and Community Engagement Group. And that includes everything from our parents to our churches to our businesses, everyone that comes together to assist us. But there will be a separate account, and the monies raised or generated, whether by a donation or an act or event, then can be apportioned among the district, depending on whatever the need is.
Is there any responsibility of the board to watch that money, to?
No, I mean, only in that we would do it as a matter of courtesy. It's an administrative responsibility to say that there's money raised, and if money is raised in the name of children and in the name of the district, that it in fact is spent in the name of the district and for children. And that's where I hearken back to the landscaping. Landscaping is not generally a considered activity for donors who raise money in the name of children. You know, that wouldn't be a typical expense. That would be a building and grounds expense. But whether
Responsibility does the board have any or none?
the board really has the responsibility, I think the board defers its responsibility to the superintendent in terms of making sure that you set the concern, you set the goal, which is supporting programs and services for children, and I carry out the goal you set. And so, would there be an issue at all with presenting those funds? No. I mean, in the same way that we as we present to you parent, the Parkview Activity Fund.
Right.
So there would be no reason not to share that information. But I think it's my responsibility as the superintendent to guard the funds. Most districts that I've talked to take an arm's length from those funds for the very reason I just stated. And maybe Guy can speak to the general state aid penalty.
Well, I can't speak to the penalty so much, but I guess I would ask the question, are these funds more akin to a parent-teacher organization or more akin to a student activity?
Parent-teacher organization.
Okay. So if it's more akin to a parent-teacher organization, those monies should be kept separate by the parent-teacher organization and administered accordingly. The school code and administrative rule speaks very specifically about student activity funds and the board's responsibility in the proper accounting and maintaining of those. But in all cases, whether it be a parent-teacher organization or a student activity fund, they're not to be commingled with the school district's regular funds. That in fact, they are to be maintained separately. The board is to have a treasurer. It can be the same treasurer as the board treasurer, but there's a separate treasurer. And then the purchases made from that fund are governed by the same rules and regulations that govern the school district's use of its funds. So if the expenditure exceeds the purchasing threshold, for example, then you have to bid. So those bid rules come into play. And administration has a responsibility, along with the treasurer over those funds, to make certain that those rules and regs are followed. Many school districts will periodically audit those funds for their proper use. So whether that's done annually or every other year, it's always done when there's a change in the leadership, whether it be the treasurer or the principal of the building in the case of the student activity fund, but periodically on a schedule.
Okay. We see the student, or the school, I guess, activity refunds, we don't approve them anymore. Are we supposed to, as a board? As long as the funds are within the confines of statute, that is, they don't exceed certain thresholds. In terms of purchasing, or are you talking about just, you are to receive a monthly report. Is that your question? A treasurer's report? Yeah.
So the treasurer should prepare a monthly report showing you the revenues and expenses and any transfers made between funds.
Does that also include like a student council?
Well, most definitely a student council, because that's a student, that would clearly be a student activity council fund.
So we should be getting LaSalle, Parkview, and a student council report.
But this particular organization and the raising of
Right.
those funds, I don't believe falls under
Right.
your domain. That in fact it is a separate organization.
You're talking about activity accounts.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
switched. It's no longer.
Yeah, and
Right.
activity
Well,
accounts
I wanted
as
to
they
make a
are
difference.
available,
Yeah,
yeah,
I was wondering
activity
what the
accounts, yes,
distinction
there's a
between-
distinction, uh-huh.
No, that's, well, this is not really the place, but the
Okay.
motion was not.
Well,
I don't
that's
think
why we're
we
gonna
need
bring
to
this
discuss
up,
this
right,
at
we're gonna
the
bring that in the
meeting
October
because
meeting.
It doesn't need to be rescinded because it was not.
And we can, that's why we're gonna put that back, that whole discussion back on the October meeting, but.
Okay.
Tuition reimbursement, why was it so much less? Last year we had 5 teachers going through 4 degrees. We have 5 teachers who finished their reading specialists. This year we have 1 in curriculum, and as I've casually talked to the staff, and we will more seriously and formally meet, we're gonna be very careful about all of our expenditures, including tuition reimbursement. So we don't anticipate the kind of expense we've incurred in the last couple of years.
But if the teachers do want to go back, don't we have to put that in the budget?
No, because I have to approve it, and I can look at that contract language,
It's
but,
$7,000 for 3 semesters, so it'd be $21,000. And I guess my question was, because now we're also paying for like a cook and
it's
non-support staff.
yeah, that's.
But it's in that line item.
Yeah, but that's minimal, and I don't think there is a certain amount of money we have to put in by contract. And I have denied a couple of those. I think we're at the point where if the request does not support the goals we've set academically, it's not something we as a district will do. Textbooks, LaSalle's is always higher because of consumables. And sometimes we have divided now our Parkview and LaSalle accounts. We have not done that in the past. Shelley preferred this as a bookkeeping procedure. She wanted to separate the buildings out so we knew who was spending money for what. And we desperately need new textbooks. If that's where we're going, the future tells me we're gonna do everything online. I don't know. But the money's not there. I mean, this budget does not reflect what we want, it's what we got. It's all we've got, unless we come together as a group and decide to deficit spend. Tech equipment, there's probably interspersed throughout the budget about $20,000 makes me personally heartsick. There's a lot of things we want to do. We're not going to be able to do. Again, it's going to be minimal. We're going to repair and replace, and hopefully, like every year since I've been here, we will have some residual and be able to act, but certainly won't look at that till February or March. This purchase service. Purchase service, this is a Shuri question also. We've talked about this in terms of the speech therapist. When you pay someone their salary and the benefits, and they're reflected in the amount of hourly rate, we pay BMS services, and she is paying a paraprofessional also. Shelley tells me, and I think she and I have studied this, it's pretty much a wash. I mean, we were hiring 3 speech folks before. This is a real issue I have not had time to address with colleges and universities, but they are not graduating enough speech therapists. I've heard other reasons, and the ones that are graduating are making big money at hospitals and in private facilities. And so schools are left to struggle. And as of next year, a parapro is not going to be allowed. And so we are hoping that the paraprofessional that we are securing, we can assist in being accepted at ISU. She was denied a master's participation with a 3.8 average. They are very tough spots to get. So in return for her service, we would like to say, if we can partner with you and get you into the program, will you be able to somehow make an agreement with us that you'll teach in our district for a number of years. And this is what districts are doing all over. They're breaking the union contract to pay at a higher rate. We are struggling as an entity to find speech therapists. And I don't know what else to do, except we've been blessed that Brenda's available to us, because there isn't anybody. We've posted, we've looked, we've interviewed, and every time we've fallen short because there's districts that can pay way more money than we can, and do. So this is as good as it gets, and it is expensive. Public relations, I know field trips are a concern. Somehow it kind of came out that we're not doing any field trips. That's not true. But we are, again, in a matter of budget concern, that we don't have field trips that we go on just because we go on them. Are they educationally based? Can you make a connection to curriculum? Is it worth the bang for the buck? Or are you taking a nice holiday? I'd rather have you partner with your parents and go out and do a fun thing with kids on the weekend, if that's the point. And so I think we have already this year approved a career trip for our junior high at Expo. And again, we're going to have to raise some monies for that purpose. This next question is a salary question, and the salaries are accounted for, so we don't need to shift and change anything there. O&M salaries, Homewood Heights is not considered, in Homewood Heights, we are renting Homewood Heights to safe and alternative schools. They are purchasing, for want of a better word, our food service, and the custodial service is minimal. If they want additional work, if they want any, for instance, they would have to purchase our maintenance folks. We'll take care of the facility. And if anything is added to that, for instance, if they wanted an air conditioner in a room, they would have to pay for the air conditioner in the room. And if the wiring needed to be upgraded, they would have to pay for that. What we'll do is make sure the heat's on and the lights work, and so we are taking care of just the basics. There was a reference to summer painting at $240. That just reflects the difference in the pay. I don't know if you remember, but there's a difference in pay from custodial pay to painter pay. And so this amount just reflects the difference in the pay. It doesn't reflect that we're only paying for $240 worth of work. Lunch, I think I dealt with that. Safe and alternative school. We haven't yet determined in terms of Head Start what additional cost there will be to feeding those children. They're going to eat whatever we eat, and I think the question remains, are they going to be able to participate in our reduced food program? And I haven't heard the answer on that yet.
Will Carrie have to order more food? Do they have it on hand?
You know, they're little tiny people and they eat family style. You know, you're talking about 3- and 4-year-olds. So our intent is that we serve whatever we have in the way that they serve it. And I'm not familiar with usage for 3- and 4-year-olds in family style. I know the adults will participate as we do in paying for our meals if we require a meal. So that's going to have to be revisited. Anything in terms of the grant, that budget is not completed for the Litchfield project, but there seems to be some confusion about this maintenance grant. Again, the architect included this huge number, $148,000. The grant is for $50,000 match over a 2-year period. You put in more money than you're going to spend. Because if you have a grant for $50,000 and you only spend $28,000, you have to return the rest of that money to the state. You have to spend what you are assigned. And so you write up for more than you are actually given. If, in other words, the $148,000 reflects if all the life safety work, and this is life safety work, this is not wish list stuff, if all of the work was done at a union rate by outside contractors, it would cost you $149,000. Well, we are not going to hire a painter outside in the union to paint our wall. We're going to do that internally. That's going to be at a significantly reduced price. So we have the intention of spending only the money we have apportioned in the grant. Bus monitor salary, there is no bus monitor for ECE because they determined one was not needed. And I think Guy addressed this site and construction question. And then when did the BOE decide to return the energy grant monies? We didn't yet. You know, but in this budget, if I had to decide today to give you a recommendation, I would recommend to you that once the accounting is done and we finish the significant life safety work, the roof, the broken air conditioning, and the Litchfield, that the rest I would recommend today to return. Okay, I think that's it.
Any further?
Is there money in the budget for more board training with Lee Langman?
I can look that up for you. Top of my head, I don't know.
And do you have a copy of the mechanics of school budget that Mrs. Bailey brought to the board a couple meetings ago? You said you were gonna make us copies.
Yeah, but I don't have them for this particular meeting, but yes, I can get you those at the October meeting. I went over that with Judy today.
I have two more questions, if anyone else, I want to give everybody else the opportunity to go. Okay. Has the budget changed since we first approved it as a tentative budget? Have you made changes in? Okay. And if Mr. Cahill could tell us, explain to us, when does a district meet an amended budget?
If the total appropriation, so if we look at page 2 of the budget form, okay, and if you look at line 19, if any one of those funds, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, if you anticipate that you will spend more than that total, then you need to amend your budget to have the authority to spend above that amount.
Okay, where does 10% come in?
The 10%, yeah, the 10% has to do with, it's usually talked about in terms of grants. But if, on pages, beginning on page 11, okay, for each, that's the expenditure account. If in the total budget, you move more than 10% of your money between line items, okay?
Okay, explain line items,
Well, each one of these is a line
one
item.
does.
So 1,100 here is a line item.
Okay,
It's not the individual cell, it's the total of those cells.
okay.
So if you look, so if you go to that last column, column K, total, for line 1,100, on page 11, everybody following? Sorry.
Got it.
You have $2,165,000 there.
Okay.
So if you move more than $216,545, a dollar more, more than 10%, then you need to amend the budget. Anything under that, you can do just by simply making the board aware of it. You can choose to or not to take action on it, but it doesn't require the publication and the whole 30-day process. So what a lot of school districts will do, especially because of Title I dollars are what are called carryover dollars, and there are reallocated dollars, and generally you don't find out about those monies. In fact, we're only now learning about the reallocated dollars, and it won't be until October that you learn about carryover amounts. I'm sorry, reverse that. Carryover now, reallocated come October. Many times that will, because you're told to basically budget at 85%, and then they give you 100%, and then 110. So that sometimes triggers that amendment process. So what a lot of school districts will do is they'll budget in contingency that extra Title I money that they may or may not get. And then if you actually get the money, then it simply is a board action to move it from contingency into the budget, into the other cells of the budget. And that way you, again, can avoid going through the whole publication process. And it makes sense. You don't know if you're going to get the money, so you put it in contingency, and then when you get it, you put it where you need it to fulfill the grant requirement.
So by approving this board, you have approved Mrs. Davis for spending whatever's in the budget.
That's correct. Again, understanding that there are laws and rules pertaining to any one purchase can't exceed a certain amount. You have your own policies that can dictate how monies are spent. But yes, this is a roadmap that you're approving for the expenditure of your funds, and as I think you already noted, 80% of that is already dictated by salaries and benefits, so your union contract. I would submit to you that your grants are dictating probably another 5 to 10% of that. So then you're really left with paying the bus. Well, you have your own bus drivers? Okay, so you're left paying Ameren. You know, in terms of big dollars, there's very little discretionary money left over that you haven't already.
Water department.
Yeah, water department and Ameren. Yeah.
That you've already, you know, that you haven't already obligated in some way. So, really money to play with this one.
Very little, and I really, really appreciate Guy coming. This is a very serious time in financial planning, and all the help we can get is appreciated, because it's, you can understand, he spends his life doing financial work, and it's very complicated. And so for those of us that don't understand it as well as we would like, that's not a surprise. This is a very complex part of our process. And we want to make sure that we are good stewards of the little money that we do have. But I think I will attest, we have done a very good job with our money. It just, I facetiously say that we don't have very many rabbits left in that hat. There's not much left to do or tweak or change. We're pretty bare bones without really limiting programs and services for kids.
I would just simply add my compliments to the staff that put this rather detailed. I mean, that's pretty transparent to get to that level of detail, every staff member by code. So kudos again to the.
And I echo that. We have been very transparent. I mean, we share our information, and the hard part is understanding what those codes mean. You know, as you ask the questions, I can understand why you asked them, but what's on the line in itself, like just a person picking this up wouldn't understand what those words meant out of context. You have to have been privileged to the conversation before and the conversation after, and then be part of doing the real work to have a real clear understanding of what all these cells mean.
Okay, explain while you're here, take up a few more minutes of your time, capital outlay.
Okay.
Explain what it is, please.
It's money's spent for capital improvements, generally pieces of equipment that have a life expectancy of more than 1 year, so it's not a consumable, and has a value, and this is generally set either by federal rule or regulation or board policy, and it could be anywhere from $500, which I think is more the federal guideline, or I know in our district in Galesburg, we look at things that have a value over $2,500. But that's set in policy, so you can choose what you want to include or exclude, but basically meets those two tests, that it's going to last more than a year, and that it has a value singly of over that. Now, singly could be a whole room of chairs, not each individual chairs. If you buy a whole room of chairs, that's a capital purchase. If you buy one chair, it's not. So you have to look at how the purchase at the time that you make it.
I didn't really answer this question completely either about tech equipment. Linda asked, why is it realistic to say we're only going to spend $5,000 when we spent $22,000 last year? The $21,844 reflects a reimbursement of that final lease payment. There were computers leased by the past Borden administration, and there were some issues there. The company failed, and this is fortunately our last payment. So that's good news.
Okay, are there any more further questions from anybody? Hearing none, Judy, go ahead and read the resolution.
Resolution number 1217, State of Illinois, County of Tazewell, Creve Coeur Public Schools District number 76, resolution to adopt the budget. Whereas the Board of Education of Creve Coeur School District number 76, County of Tazewell and State of Illinois has caused to be prepared in tentative form a budget, and the Secretary of this Board of Education has made the same conveniently available to public inspection for at least 30 days prior to final action thereon. And whereas a public hearing was held as to such budget on the 24th day of September 2012, notice of said hearing having been given at least 30 days prior thereto, as required by law, and all other legal requirements have been complied with. Now therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Education of Creve Coeur School District number 76, County of Tazewell and State of Illinois as follows. Section 1, that the fiscal year of this school district be and the same is hereby fixed and declared to commence on the first day of July 2012 and to end on the 30th day of June 2013. Section 2, that the following budget attached hereto and made a part hereof, containing an estimate of amounts available in each fund separately and of expenditures from each fund, be and the same is hereby adopted as the budget of the school district for said fiscal year. Adopted this 24th day of September, AD 2012.
Hearing nothing more, I adjourn this hearing.
You have to move.
Wait, no, I'm ready to go home. Roll call.
We have a second.
We have to
Motion.
I move.
I'm tired.
Mr. President, I move to adopt the resolution 12-17 to adopt the FY13 budget, fiscal year 13 budget.
Is there a second? Any further discussion needed? Hearing none, roll call.
Sherry Archdale,
Aye.
Linda Bailey,
No.
Michelle Franklin,
No.
Rebecca Kern,
Yes.
Julie True,
Aye.
Judy Strong, yes, Charles Thomas.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Now, I need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call.
Sherry Archdale,
Aye.
Linda Bailey,
Aye.
Michelle Franklin, Rebecca Kern, Julie True,
Aye.
Judy Strong, yes, Charles Thomas.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned.
Maybe,